Thanks for checking out this edition of Inside the Zone as we wrap up the season, which, as we were talking, seems really, really weird because we didn't make it out of the month of April for the first time in, 5 years? 5 years or 6 years?
Well, if you count the 1 year the Komets didn't make the playoffs, so you have to go back, I believe, to 2006,
Wow.
the last time the Komets lost in the first round.
Wow, that is amazing and an amazing streak, and I know Komets fans are never happy unless there's a championship, unless there's a cup raised. But let's take a look back before we take a look forward to the offseason. When you take a look at this season as a whole, what is your biggest takeaway of watching this Komets team night in, night out for 72 games and then for the postseason?
Well, I got to say resolve of this team, actually. You can look at the negatives and, it was a roller coaster ride, but, if you look at the numbers, they're not that bad. You still finished third place. Mm-hmm. You had a rough patch where, you went 2-12 there in the month of February, but you lost 9 games in overtime. When you think about that, wow, if we win those 9 games, we're in second place. But if we lose 9 games, we're out of the playoffs. So, this team had great resolve to really fight through all the injuries, the call-ups, the players coming in and out. But it showed that, even though the Komets got off to a bad start, 1-5, they knew it was a long season. And management and coaches, did what they had to do to make this team come around.
One of the numbers that really stuck out to me is you look at shootout losses. They had 6 of them that tied for the league lead in the ECHL. So what do you think, how did that impact kind of how the overall standings turned out? Because, like you said, in years or in shows past, Toledo had a great stretch at the beginning of the season that they kind of coasted on.
Yeah.
The Komets had that rough stretch, as you just mentioned, and shootout losses, 6 of them. I mean, that's kind of an anomaly, I guess, for the Komets when you talk about that many in one season.
Yeah, you win, but the Komets had the most overtime games. I think they're tied with Rapid City for the most in the league. So they still got a lot of points out of overtime, and they managed to salvage a lot of points, getting goals in the last few minutes of games to actually get it to overtime. So again, that goes back and shows that this team did have a lot of tenacity and a lot of heart when it came right down to it.
Was it 48 players that were used for the Komets this season?
I believe we broke into the 50s. We broke into the 50s.
Once it was all said and done, it was into the 50s.
Yeah.
So how do you gel a unit like that? Because you look at the roster, there are a lot of different names, and there always are in the ECHL season, but this year more so seeming that there were different names at the beginning of the season than were on the roster at the end. Sean Sedlowski comes to mind, Brady Shaw comes to mind. A lot of big-time players come to mind when you take a look at, they didn't start the season here.
Yeah, the answer is you can't. I mean, you really can't. You can bring in talent. That's going to carry you so far. But unless this team skates consistently together, you're not going to go very far in the playoffs. But this team did have a lot of talent on it. I don't think there was a night when they had the same lineup. And so that shows you something, that even though they fought through all that, they were able to make the playoffs, and a lot of franchises would just love to be able to say they made the playoffs, because you look at a team like Wheeling, who's missed the playoffs 3 years in a row,
or Indy, who's historically not been a playoff team, certainly not a perennial playoff team. One of the numbers again that jumps out: last year's team was number 1 in the ECHL in goals scored. That was a special unit.
Yeah.
This year's actually, even though you dropped off to 3.23 goals a game, it was still middle of the pack. It really wasn't that bad offensively. But that was one of the things. They got outscored by about 15 goals this season. I think it was 233 to 248. I have a feeling that hasn't happened in quite some time.
Yeah, it wasn't even so much the offense, because you can't really compare what happened last year to what happened this year, because that was a special team. I think they were a plus 50 in the third period, which is just insane.
Yeah.
So those numbers are probably more on par. So. But there was a lot of offense on this team, and again, it went down to players not playing with each other very often. So if it's more like 35 guys in this lineup or on the roster, maybe it's a different story. But again, you did what you had to do. When players were available, the Komets jumped on it, and they were looking at every chance to improve this team.
All right, let's stop looking backwards. Let's start looking forwards. What do you think is the biggest storyline for the Komets as we head into the offseason?
It's probably, again, getting the consistency. Who do we think is going to be here all season? And also with the affiliation with Las Vegas, I think that is going to be key. How that is going to develop, because you look at what's happening in Cincinnati and Newfoundland, they've managed to park a lot of AHL and NHL contracts there in those rosters. So, and Vegas is a unique situation. They don't have very much organizational depth. So this is, a good opportunity for them, to build through the draft and send prospects to Fort Wayne. So, you can go back and look at that. I know Coach Gary Graham mentioned that a lot, that we didn't have the affiliated players. We only had one really all season long, Zach Fucali. So, I look at that affiliation as really, really being key.
That is the number one thing on my list. That was the number one question. Is it was very exciting last year when the deal got done, especially considering how well Vegas had done, and kind of a Cinderella story to a certain degree, and certainly still. A team that made the postseason is a team that people are excited about. But you're right, organizational depth is something that they're still working on as an expansion team.
Yeah. So, I mean, you couldn't really expect too much out of a team that was 1 year old, right. So hopefully, if this affiliation continues over the next year or two, maybe it can develop in something like what Cincinnati has right now.
What kind of time frame do you have? Because I'm sure David and Michael are working the phones, and you'd rather get it done earlier than later. I know Vegas being out of the postseason, Michael said it with us live on Thursday before the auction, that actually, in the grand scheme of things, kind of helps.
Yes.
Because you can start these conversations earlier without having to worry about the on-ice product as it is.
Yeah, we went late May. Las Vegas went all the way to the Stanley Cup Finals last year. So, this affiliation didn't really start up until the end of August, 1st of September. So, both teams can kind of look at this and say, let's take advantage of this extra time that we have. So, in the end, having this extra month, 6 weeks, could very turn out to be a good thing.
One of the big questions fans have, the status of Gary Graham. Last offseason, he signs a 2-year deal, so he's 1 year into the 2-year deal, still has a year left on the contract. What do you think Gary takes away from this season? I think most people expect him to be back, but what do you think he learned from this season as a head coach in the ECHL?
Well, I think, maybe, it could come down to just, again, with the affiliation, the Komets got a late start recruiting players last year, too. So you're going to have that extra month and 6 weeks. You can start calling guys now who aren't playing. So the takeaway I think is finding more consistency, and I hate to say that because that's something that he harped on all season long.
Oh, really? I never noticed in the press conference.
Yeah, we're sounding pretty cliche here, but it's the truth. That's what it comes down to.
When you take a look at some of the veteran guys, that's really the big question because you have so few slots for veteran guys on the roster. Where do you see guys like Jamie Shaftsma and Sean Sadlowski, Cody Soul? Where do you see the veteran core for this next group of Komets coming, and how do you see it shaping up, I guess?
Well, it's too early to tell. Those questions are going to have to be asked for those guys and management. That's one thing I don't have the answers to.
Shane, you have to have the answers.
They just tell me who's on this roster, and that's who I try to, not butcher their names too much. That's pretty much my job. So, no, when it comes to veterans, obviously there's going to be a lot on the market, but I don't know what anybody's plans are right now.
Have they said anything to you about anything that they've noticed about maybe the way the ECHL has changed, or just other than affiliated players, how they want to shape a roster maybe differently than they did this year in the past offseason?
Last year, it was a special group. There was a lot of speed on that team. It was also a pretty big team, but so you kind of flip the script. You see what Toledo did. The year before the Komets built a team to beat Toledo. Toledo built a team this year to beat the Komets. So, we have to look at, you got to have that good mix. You got to have that good mix of size and speed. So look for that. And also, the problems were at the blue line. So you know what? I got to think that the first calls are made are to defensemen to shore up that blue line, because normally, a hockey team is built from the goal line on out. So with the affiliation, you have to expect you're going to get a goaltender, and then you got to start looking at defensemen.
For you, as a guy who watched this team 72 games of the regular season plus the postseason, what do you most remember from this season? What's going to be your biggest takeaway out there in the broadcast booth?
This team did have a lot of character, and it had a lot of tenacity. But the things I'm going to remember, unfortunately, are kind of bad. You drop a game 11-0, you lose a game 10-8. So there was a lot of weird things.
I remember that
on.
Wednesday night game.
Yeah, so there's a lot of weird things going on. And I'll remember that stuff. But I'm also very much look at the positives, because there are some really good guys who came on this team. a guy like Brady Shaw. He's the one who really kind of stands out in my mind. He was Orlando's leading scorer. He was in Colorado the last 2 years. A guy who's won championships, and he just kind of fell in our laps. And so there's a guy who comes into your lineup, and he's one of those guys that you can look at. Maybe hey, we build around this guy next year.
Yeah, who are some of the young guys you think that the Komets can try to recruit for next year and bring in or bring back, I guess I should say, that they can build this team around? I thought Anthony Nellis was a nice little pickup at the end of the season.
Yeah, Anthony Nellis and Kyle Hope certainly made big impacts down the stretch. But you had Jake Camras, who was the team's Rookie of the Year. You had Anthony Petrozelli kind of come into his own as well. Gage Terrell, unfortunately, we didn't get to see him much. He was injured in the second game, but the game and a half he played, he impressed. So no, I think there's going to be a lot of talent out there this summer. So I think you're also going to looking for youth maybe this year. Maybe it's one of those years that we kind of look to the college kids in the amateur ranks a little bit more. But just like Newfoundland, that was a team that was pretty much built. They don't have very many veterans. It was built on youth.
All right. Well, so much to look forward to this offseason for the Komets. Unfortunately, it comes here a little early, but we appreciate you coming in every week, Shane. It's been fun to get your perspective, especially a guy that calls every single game for the Komets. You know him backwards and forwards, so it's been great to get your perspective every Monday here on Inside the Zone.
Well, it's my pleasure.
All right. Thanks, Shane, and we'll see you next season.